I want to talk to you for about 25 minutes, and then I really want this to be interactive. The thing I always say in a learning environment is that we have to allow people some clumsiness, especially when the topics are difficult. And so don't be afraid to speak up just because you don't think you have exactly the right words that you want to use. My session is about learning, but I have been given some leeway to shift it based on what's been happening, and I've done that. I'm hoping that you're going to interact, and I have one request. I'm going to show you some data. Some of you will have seen it at a conference that I did with CIPD earlier. It wasn't this year, last year, I think. But I'm going to show it again here at the end of this. And I'm just asking that you don't screen cap it. You don't post it on social media. I haven't published it yet. And the reason I haven't published it yet is because no one cared up until about 2 weeks ago. So what I don't want is for just to be out there, and for that to be appropriated just at the time when people actually give a damn. So I'm hoping you'll be all right with that. Other than that, I hope you're okay. It's really important that we recognize that nobody's been working from home. David was absolutely right. It's an enforced working, where nobody's working from home. What we are is, by law, locked in our houses for most of the time to avoid dying from a virus or spreading a virus to somebody else who's going to be more susceptible and therefore die. That's what's been happening. And in that backdrop, sequestered at home with insufficient broadband, either in terms of the actual internet or in terms of the capacity of our brain, we have been attempting to perform at work. So don't let anybody in your organization use the kind of stress and mental anguish that people are feeling right now as an excuse away from remote working, because remote working is not like this. Working from home is when you let somebody take half a day so that they can be there to collect their Amazon parcel. And that is not what we've been doing right now. So I want to talk to you about learning, and just to be direct, a basic learning culture has been essential for a long, long time, and it's been absent in the modern era of the workplace. Some of you may be in those organizations that are different, but most of us are not. Almost every workplace learning element is a contrivance. You can tell that because of the proliferation of e-learning, click and quiz stuff. We have turned learning, we've distilled it into an act of compliance rather than what it could be, which is the idea that it's a performance tool, a life-enhancing tool, a feature of the agile intelligence that's going to be required to thrive in a post-COVID world. I think it's really important that we do this. Learning cultures are not on the same continuum as utilization cultures. If you are a utilization culture, you are not a learning culture. You cannot regard time in the appropriate way if it's only meaningful when it's billable. I think we have to respect this and understand that being a learning culture doesn't mean abandoning productivity and performance. The opposite. And in fact, when we look at utilization cultures, they have abandoned productivity. Look at our numbers in the UK alone. They are terrible for productivity. So it's not like the status quo is working. There's kind of a pyramid scheme of utilization cultures, and it's going to be disassembled in the future world of work. As we start looking at some of the changes, augmented employees, and I know that sounds like we're going to turn people into cyborgs, but already we are looking at the use of virtual reality, even in workplaces, never mind outside of workplaces. If you've got a sit-stand desk, you're an augmented employee. Welcome to the new world. AI and analytics, contingent workers who work on projects with you but aren't employed by you, offshoring, remote and agile working, all of this stuff means that the bottom of this pyramid is going to get chopped out. And we're going to have to look to new ways of working and new ways of learning. The impact of the last few weeks and months has been radical. HR has suddenly stopped being just this compliance center, and now people are the focus. Layered on top of the complications of COVID, obviously, is the racism and race awareness, if you want to call it that, of the last few. But what we have seen is that learning has become also the center of life. Who thought that we would be in a situation where people are tuning in tuning in every night almost to look at graphs, to listen to scientists, to learn about R rates. Who thought we would be there? But we are. And even that has shifted our mentality. And it's something that may not, and I hope does not, go back when we start looking at workplaces. Our concept of time has changed as well, which is good in some ways, not just because we can't tell what day of the week it is nowadays, but because people have got time back from those 2 to 4 hour commutes that they used to have. And so people are taking and embracing learning, whether it's a hobby for mental health or whether it's professional development, or the other time bomb that's now ticking for most workplaces. And it may not manifest until after this next financial crisis is over, but it will manifest. People are suddenly looking at their jobs and realizing this is not the learning environment I want. And they're thinking, I'm going to vote with my feet at some point, even if not right now. Even furlough embraces learning, the idea that, you know, you can't do any work during furlough, but you can do training. And I don't know how many people have embraced that, but I think it's really important. And then, of course, the ultimate opportunity for learning in the last few weeks, everybody learned that racism exists. And now we want to do something about it now in 2020. Organizations, I got calls from some of our clients and people who've never talked to me before, saying that a metaphorical bomb has gone off in their organization, and it's allies and Black and brown people who are now saying, why aren't we doing more? Why don't we know more? Why can't we learn more? This situation has made a mockery of meritocracy. It's made the myth of equality of opportunity plain. And now people need to learn. I know many of you have been impacted. You probably suffer the gamut of emotions, from rage to shame. I've heard people who've talked about how this has been a revelation for them. In other words, they have gone 40, 30, 50 years without knowing any of this. Others of you have been aware to varying degrees, but never perhaps conceptualized how difficult life can be for some people. And even as workplaces have rushed to help with learning, town halls, listening sessions and things like that, we've realized that our problem is actually bigger than we thought. There are companies out there who are doing all hands, and the comment sections of those virtual meetings is a litany of all lives matter and racist bile. Learning is still the answer for us. In the last weeks, COVID and this racist element, we suddenly realized that learning is the route to safety, right? Learning how to use PPE, even learning how to wash our hands. We didn't even know that we didn't know how to wash our hands. And this is the problem with learning. We mostly don't know what we don't know. Well, for organizations, people now embrace that learning is about safety, and that's something that's not going to be lost on them when we get back to whatever we get back to. But also, organizations need to understand that learning is about survival. The new normal is a terrible phrase, and you should abandon it. The new normal is about everything being as similar as possible to how it was, plus or minus some ameliorations or some prophylactics to deal with a specific virus. And I'm telling you right now that we need to move past that. If we want a learning culture, if we want to embrace innovation, if we want to have equity, we need to move past that. I'm calling for a cultural clean slate. The idea that we use this as an opportunity to say, how would we work for the highest performance, the highest productivity, the highest human thriving? How would we work if given a chance to start over? Because you know what? We've been given a chance to start over. And there are some things that we can do when it comes to the cultural clean slate in terms of learning. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you and see if we can do this. So this will be clumsy, but here we go. I'm going to share computer sound and share. So I'm assuming now, because I can't see anything, that you can see what I'm looking at here. So David, let me know if this is not the case. So this is Agile learning cultures, because I wanted to make sure there was something really tangible on this, and then I am going to talk about the broader concept of learning and the narrower concept of learning about race. The agile learning cultures thing is really, really important because there are some criteria if you want to embed this in your organization, and here are some of them. The idea that you have to be driven by pedagogy, not utilization, right? So instead of your learning paradigm being built on how little time can we allow people to do something perfunctory, but rather it's built on how do people best learn? Pedagogy, not utilization. This is the other one. If people are supposed to learn only on the side of their desk, only in their own time, you're not a learning culture. You are simply expanding someone's workday. So learning has to be allowed to happen on work time, not just off the side of your desk. We have to make learning an expectation of performance management. And that means embracing the idea of not just technical learning, which is what we've already got, but executive skills, right? The skills that we take for granted that managers of people and managers of processes will have, but usually don't. And then the emotional labor. It's a brilliant work of a woman called Hochschild, a researcher from California. She's absolutely amazing, does this work on emotional labor. But that is the essence of leadership. When you talk to people about what great leaders are, when you talk to people about what great colleagues are, it is rarely, if ever, the technical brilliance. It's rarely their ability to project manage that comes forward. It's usually those emotional labor elements that make a difference. We've got to make sure if you want a learning culture, your learning culture isn't subject to the whims of the economy. And I'm not suggesting that we sacrifice our organizations on the back of just learning and not performance, but this is not a juxtaposition. You learn and develop in order to win and to stay on top. But if you only do substantive, pedagogically led learning when you think you are in the good times, then it makes it clear that it's not a real thing. It's just an add-on, and that's not going to work. You've got to reward peer-led learning. People who have expertise and share it within the organization, they have to be facilitated, they have to have structures to do it. And then you've got to reward them, and reward them with the same kind of formality that you reward people for delivering on their technical skills. Learning has got to be embedded in progression criteria. You should not be able to advance in an organization if you haven't done substantive learning or facilitated other people learning. You've got to have your leaders as cohort educators, not just as project managers, but they should have cohorts of people who you are trying to deliver a broad set of technical, executive, and emotional labor skills to, and they should be a part of that. That cohort learning should not be, it should be team-based learning. So it shouldn't just be a senior leader teaching a group of juniors, but understanding that the learning can be reciprocal in both ways. And then you have to have clear pathways for disseminating best practice. There are tons of organizations out there that are so siloed, even down to the team level, that expertise that is generated within one team is jealously guarded. So the whole organization never gets to benefit from it. And we must be better than that if we want to make a difference. So those are just some of the ways that I think you can embed learning into an organization. The last one, I suppose, the last couple, sorry, is embracing career diversity. And this is really important because this is not just a question of, oh, yes, I embrace it. I say that. In many organizations, when you think of professional services, people respect far more highly and your progression will be faster. If you enter one service line and often one sub-service line, remain in that service line all the way through. You're blinkered. You're told not to look over here and over there. You're not to work cross silo, not to learn new skills. Just stay in this pathway. It's actually true in academia as well. But if we do that, you're not an agile learning culture. You're just trying to produce the same widget over and over again, and you can't take advantage of some of the things you'll need to take advantage of. And then you've got to prioritize curiosity in the people that you take on board. There's no point if your criteria for workers are just based on the technical skills and not based on the fact that they might be a person who wants to look around, learn more, and teach. You're not going to have the kind of agile learning culture that you really want. And here's the last one. I'm sorry it's stuck at the bottom here, but purpose. There's got to be a values alignment to learning. The idea that you are aligned to your values. And And this is not the case right now. We do technical learning, we do compliance learning, we do governance learning. But we don't do learning to mandate that our people are aligned with our values. And the last 2 or 3 weeks has proved that. We need to mandate that if we want to make a difference. I'm not sure that alignment with principles and values has ever mattered. And I say that because I've seen the data on people who have told us that it doesn't matter. But learning now is so important, and it's important because right now you are going to have to deal with as HR, but not just as HR. Every one of your leaders is going to have to deal with mourning, anxiety, a sense of betrayal in their workforce. And I don't have time to go into all the different ways that's happening, but that will be happening. You're going to have to deal with their reframed life and work expectations now that they've had this different way of working for a while. And of course, we've just learned about racism. So we're going to have to absolutely have some of the most difficult conversations moderated internally that we've ever had. Learning has never been more important, and it is important in an area of learning, this emotional labor area, this facilitated leadership area, what we call connected leadership area, than it ever has been before. The connected leader concept I want to share with you, the idea of connected leaders and connected colleagues. And I hope you're seeing all of this because it's kind of all over the place on my screen currently, but inclusive, engaged, effective, and continually evolving leaders and colleagues who can create, participate in, and sustain elite, diverse teams, whether remote or co-located. This is a connected leader. This is a connected colleague. This is the standard of learning that is required at minimum. So one of the things I wanted to do is not keep you looking at slides the whole time. So hopefully I can get rid of these somehow. There we go. And look at you for a little minute. Hopefully you've seen that you were able to see the slides fully there because they're slightly cut off on my screen and time is running out on me. I want to do something useful for you in terms of race. I've been on the TV every day talking about this, and you may be tired of talking about this. And if you are, I don't mean to be mean, but you're part of the problem. Because the only way that we solve anything, whether it be a strategic goal or otherwise, is to have it continually on the agenda. So I want to help you. And the way I want to help you is by hopefully giving you some anti-racism quick wins. I think it's really important that we don't screw this up. And I don't want people who are well-meaning to be punished for being well-meaning. And this is, I hope, how we can avoid you being punished. So I'll show you once again, anti-racism quick wins. Stop being surprised. It wounds the soul. And I obviously, it's important to say, I do not speak on behalf of all Black people. It wounds my soul when I tell people that people cross the street when I walk, when I tell people that I'm stopped and searched 3 times a week, sorry, 3 times a year. It wounds my soul to see the surprise on the face of white people, because it tells me that for their entire lives, they have been unaware of something that they could have helped stop. So stop being surprised. Don't tell people that you've just realized, because it just means that you've been colleagues with somebody for a year, for 2 years, for 10 years, and never really known anything about them. Don't talk about being tired of talking about this. It's devastating. For those of us who are Black and brown, what we have witnessed in the numerous killings that have happened even in the last month in America, and the abuses that happen in this country, is that people can be killed for looking like us, and that has a psychic toll. Understand that being well-meaning is not enough. Being truly well-meaning means skilling yourself up to a point where you can be useful. That's what being an ally is. Black people aren't your library, and they aren't your librarians. For many of the organizations that you are a part of, there will not be a huge number of Black people. and they can't be responsible for stopping the racism that they suffer. Black people are experts in their experience. They're not necessarily experts in organizational change. I speak to you and my expertise is informed by my Blackness, but I can't help your organization because I'm Black. It's because of my expertise. And so don't use your Black colleagues as the ultimate intervention. Speaking of interventions, we've got to stop doing interventions that don't or won't work, right? Stop upskilling minorities. The programs that you do for minorities need to be really carefully done, right? We've got to stop the idea that, for example, with women, you need to give younger women assertiveness training so that they can speak up in meetings. And then when they get that training and they get more senior, you need to give them some de-assertiveness training so they don't appear too difficult. We need to stop armoring minorities with education and instead de-weaponize the cultures that we oversee. We need to stop looking at this as a deficit model. Black people aren't broken, women aren't broken, people with disabilities and impairments aren't broken. The environment they're in is differentially toxic. And that's the model that we need to approach our learning with. And when you do that, you suddenly realize who needs learning. We need to stop doing stuff, being seen to do stuff, and instead be strategic and tactical and make sure that we are delivering. And instead, we need to do some things. And one of the things that nearly every organization needs to do is they need to do this. They need to do independent, validated, is valid and reliable ethnographic research that gives you thick data that helps you understand how singularly benign pieces of policy, procedure, ways of doing it, norms, and whatever else combine to create inequity. Because it's only when you understand that really complex interwoven picture that you can create a systemic solution to a systemic challenge. This is the kind of learning that organizations need to do. And they need to recognize too, that they aren't yet aware where they really are. In the last week, when it comes to race alone, we've suddenly realized that this stages of learning process, right? Unconscious competence, conscious incompetence, all the way through conscious competence, unconscious, all of this. We thought, I think, before this crisis, that in terms of D&I broadly and race specifically, we were at that unconscious competence area, right? I recognize the implications of inclusion. I'm able to integrate my understanding into everyday practice. We thought that's where we were in organizations, but actually we've realized we are actually here. We're in conscious incompetence. I know that I don't know how to handle difference well, but I don't know what to do about it, is where we're at. And knowing that informs the kind of training that we need to do. I've looked at my clock and I have remarkably little time. And I feel like it's important to show you some things. And so I want to kind of skip through what I was otherwise going to do. But I first want to talk about white privilege, and this is going to be hard. Because I think the moment you mention white privilege, everybody thinks something terrible about white people, and it doesn't mean all white people are racist, and that's not relevant or interesting. But this is white privilege. It doesn't mean that a white person's life hasn't been hard. It doesn't mean that you've never suffered. It means that your skin color isn't one of the reasons for your hardship or suffering. And the truth is, we know this already inherently in organizations because we've been asking people, and again, this is part of the research I'm asking you not to put on social media. We've asked people about this, and even on a visual sense, people know it. Does your workplace look like it should if the best minds are hired and progressed on merit? This is 100-odd very senior leaders, so people only in the exec across about 5 different sectors. 100-odd senior leaders, 198 senior leaders, and 77% of them said that their workplace doesn't look like it should if everyone was hired on merit. When you move on from that, we've asked people about inclusion. What's your experience of inclusion? That top graph there is talking about, for you personally, what's your experience? And this is why the inclusion conversation is so, This is why the inclusion conversation is so important. Because what you realize is so few people are fully included. Just 19% of 2,074 people across white-collar working places felt fully included. 19%. 27% of them feel a compliance level of inclusion or below. I always pin 4 at compliance, the idea that nobody's doing anything illegal to me. And 27% of people in these, who are mostly obviously white people in the workplace, had a level of inclusion that was compliance or below. However, when you asked about other people, more diverse people, look at this. All of a sudden, you're in a position where 52% of more diverse people were suspected to feel compliance or lower levels of inclusion. People believed that diverse people were more than twice as likely to suffer levels of compliance or below. And the reason this is important is because many of you have engagement surveys, which will show very small differentials. And I just want to show you what happens when you look at broad spectrum things like averages across engagement surveys. 5.2 compared to 4.4 would probably not be statistically significant. However, when you look at that population, all of a sudden, you realize that the difference is 52% of people are compliance or below over here. And in this scenario, only 27%. So I don't know how much time I have left, and I probably don't have time to show you the rest. And David, please interrupt. I'm going to have my colleague who's going to drag me out of here in a minute. And I wanted to make sure you at least got to ask some questions. I didn't get to show you the really fun clouds, but I hope this has been useful in terms of the idea of what it takes to learn and how you can apply that learning right now. Happy to hear from you, David. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, so we've got a few questions that have come through. So the first one is, do you see the shift to a learning culture as you've described it as much of a paradigm leap or change as moving to people-centered work? So is it the next stage? Is it fundamentally different, or is it we need to do what we do now but a bit different?
No, I think whoever asked that question is absolutely right. It's a paradigm shift because this change in environment is actually tied to some very tangible things. It's tied to a change in billing arrangement for many organizations. It's something they're already trying to tackle because of AI and analytics and people being unwilling to pay on the same basis for that as they do for human beings. But that's such a fundamental shift for most organizations. That is what has to happen. And I'm not sure the appetite for it even now, outside of people. I know there's an appetite for people. I don't think there's an appetite necessarily for some of the status quo holders.
And to that point around status quo holders, so one of the questions is, how can lower level people, and I assume that's hierarchy rather than anything else, get senior managers to realize that learning culture has become a tick box culture? Or how could you help senior teams focus on structural change?
So I don't think managers need to be helped to realize. I think they know that learning is a tick box compliance culture. I don't think it's the job of lower level people. I don't think it's the job of more junior people to force their company to change. But I do think you can help people by saying, this is the kind of learning that engages me. This is the kind of learning that's exciting to me. This is the kind of learning that is purposeful in terms of not just, I feel great with this learning, but this is going to help me be a better practitioner, a better whatever audit, whatever you do, right? I think that's what we can do. And then, and I know we are going into a recession, but just remember, vote with your feet. When you can, vote with your feet, because there are organizations out there, and they may not have all the marquee names, and some of them may be, because some of them may be big organizations that realize they have to shift radically. There are organizations who will be more aligned with this. And when you vote with your feet, it forces entire sectors to move.
Fantastic. So next question, where do you think growing individual learning agility fits with organizational adaptability? So drawing those two threads together, which is about how you help individuals learn, but what that means for the organization. So how does that help us deal with a situation like the one that we're currently in needing to apply learning to really different environments or experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of levels here. I mean, I think to respond to what's happened to us now, there was a bunch of expertise that nobody knew about. There was a bunch of expertise because we don't have the pathways in. And remember in that agile learning cultures list, I know it was a really long list that I gave you, The idea that you have to create obvious pathways and reward people for inputting to those pathways. And this is not new science, by the way. Back in the late 60s, sorry, early 70s, Nissan was doing this with a really simple thing. On their shop floor, they said, it is the mandated job of every employee here to help us get better, and to, if there's a way that we can improve ourselves or yourselves in one small way, you must tell us. And that's how they started developing the just-in-time system, because people kept on putting in little notes into a box. Now, we can be more sophisticated than that now, but I'm telling you, there was expertise as to how to manage meetings differently, how to do remote working. It was existent, and often in some of the most junior people, but there was no pathway for it and no recognition for it. And people are creatures of recognition.
And you talked about systemic solutions to systemic challenges. And obviously they're the trickiest, right? They're the biggest, they're the most all-encompassing, and they're the ones that we can often feel that we don't have enough individual agency over. What would your tips be? And tips maybe simplifying it all too greatly, but for people who want to face into some of these really knotty, seemingly all-encompassing things, where do you start?
I'm trying to avoid kind of sophistry on this one. I've been talking a lot about looking at the challenges, especially when talking about big societal challenges, as a function of what can I do individually and what can the organization be doing in parallel. And I think the individual stuff is really the key. And you said at the very beginning, it's about learning, right? It's about educating. It's about making sure that you have enough knowledge to even contribute to the debate or the conversation. And so if you think IT needs to be improved, you're not a very useful agent of that by saying, oh, IT's crap. You've got to get some insight so that you can say, because organizations respond better to solutions than they do to critique without a solution. So critique by all means, but with a solution. So that individual learning, and that's as true for racism as it is for IT improvements or agile working or maternity cover or whatever it is, all of that requires us to upskill ourselves. And the problem with it is it's super boring. So it's boring to learn the boring stuff, because that's entry into the good stuff. But we don't want to do it because it's completely unrecognized for the most part. Nobody kind of grants you anything. Nobody tweets about it. Nobody gives you those hearts on your thing for that. But we have to embrace it. I don't know how much time is left, but there's one thing I just want to show before we all go away. And have you been seeing the slide fine? Is it centered and whatever?
It's just for feedback. It's a bit bloated, so you've probably seen the top.
That's what I thought. And so I'm going to try and get rid of this and see if I can do it a slightly different way. So this is padder, filler, padder, sorry.
So I guess whilst you're doing that, and you mentioned IT, I would like to acknowledge that I understand it hasn't been a seamless experience for people. But to go back to the overall and overarching point around being learning, we're understanding how to do this better, and we will keep getting better at it. But it's been a roller coaster ride. So the one thing I'd like to say is, if John's going to end up and close off on this, I really appreciate him sticking with us this morning and being the epitome of patience as we found our way towards hopefully streaming this live to you.
It's been my pleasure, and I'm hoping I can get this to you, because at the moment I'm struggling to find it even on mine outside of the slide. I found it. Okay, I just want to show you this. And again, I think every time I speak to somebody, I should wound their soul in the most constructive way possible. And this is going to do that for you. Racism is learned. Because it's learned, it can be unlearned, but it is learned early. And the longer we wait, the harder it is to do anything about it. If we don't do it systemically, we almost certainly can't solve it. This is a video of something called the doll test, which is 1940. It was originally done, and this is a version that was done in Italy. And so when people start talking to you about racism and how embedded it is, and, you know, surely everybody's just a nice person, it's not really about that. It's about the fact that the lens through which we look at the world is one that is differential. And so I'm going to show you the doll test and say thank you, because I will then sign off.
Quale bambola è bianca? Quale bambola è nera? Quale delle due è bella?
Questa.
Qual è quella bella? Qual è quella brutta? E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva? Qual è buona?
Lei.
Perché è buona?
Perché ha gli occhi celesti.
Quale è cattiva? Perché è cattiva?
Perché è tutto nero.
E qual è la bambola che ti somiglia di più? Quale bambola è nera?
È offeso.
Chi?
Tu.
Perché?
Perché mi hai chiamato nero.
Perché ti offendo?
Mi offendi perché altri bambini mi hanno offeso con cattiveria.
No, io non ho usato nessuna cattiveria.
Quello mi sta guardando storto.
By the age of 5, you learn that.